A weathered black rancher, scorned by the world that stole his freedom, stood alone on his New Mexico land, until a stagecoach stopped at his gate and a pale woman stepped down clutching a marriage letter he swore he never wrote. The town whispered he was cursed, destined to die as he lived, silent and forgotten. But she refused to leave, and behind her climbed a deaf boy the world wanted locked away. The rancher saw in them the family he'd failed to save once before, while a powerful judge plotted to destroy all three and seize the land. When the law arrived with custody papers and arrest warrants, one question remained. Would he break his 15-year silence to fight, or let fear take everything again? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach kicked up dust as it rolled into town. Elias Boone stood near the general store, loading supplies onto his wagon. He didn't look up. 15 years in this valley had taught him that silence kept trouble at bay. The coach stopped. A woman stepped down. She wore a traveling dress too fine for this rough country, her face pale beneath the dirt of the road. She looked around with wide eyes, clutching a folded paper against her chest. Then a boy climbed down after her, maybe 10 years old, with light brown skin and careful movements. He said nothing. He watched everything. Elias felt the stares before he heard the whispers. The townsfolk had stopped to watch. They always stopped when something unusual happened, and a white woman arriving alone was unusual enough. A white woman with a mixed child was a spectacle. The woman approached the nearest man. Her voice carried across the square. She was looking for Elias Boone. Elias went still. No one looked for him. No one spoke his name unless they had to. The man pointed. Every head turned. Elias met her eyes across the distance. She walked toward him with purpose, the boy trailing behind. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to retreat. She held out the paper. A letter. His name written across the top in neat script. She said he'd sent for her. Said they were to be married. Elias took the letter. Read it once, read it again. The words described his property, his land, even the creek that ran along the western edge. But the signature wasn't his. Close, but wrong. The loop on the B was too wide. He looked up. She waited for him to speak, to welcome her, to explain. The boy stood behind her shoulder, watching Elias with dark, intelligent eyes. Elias shook his head. He'd never written this letter, never sent for anyone. Her face went white, then red. She insisted he had. She'd sold everything to come here. Everything. The crowd grew. Judge Caldwell emerged from his office across the street, drawn by the commotion. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He moved through the crowd like he owned it. The judge's voice boomed with false cheer. Well, well. Elias Boone with a mail-order bride. How progressive, how modern. Laughter rippled through the watchers. Not kind laughter, the kind that drew blood. The woman turned on them. Her name was Clara. Clara Whitlow. She had traveled 3 weeks to get here. The letter was real. She had it right there in her hand. The judge offered to mediate. His office was just across the way. They could sort this out like civilized people. Elias examined the letter again. Someone had gone to great effort. They knew his property, knew enough to make it convincing. He looked at the judge. The judge looked back with that same empty smile. Clara's voice cracked. She had $12 left, nowhere else to go. The boy hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The boy. Elias looked at him properly now. The child met his gaze without fear. Something in those eyes reminded Elias of someone long dead. The judge asked the question everyone was thinking. Would Elias turn out a hungry child? Elias felt the trap closing. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to send them away, to keep his walls intact. But the boy's hollow cheeks, the desperation in Clara's stance, the memory of another child who'd once depended on him. He told them they could stay one night. The barn had a loft. He'd bring blankets. Clara's relief was visible. So was her wounded pride. She accepted because she had no choice. They walked to his ranch in silence. The town's eyes followed them all the way out. At the property, Elias showed them the barn. Clean hay, solid walls. He brought wool blankets and a basket of bread and cheese. He told them it wasn't charity. He wouldn't leave a dog hungry. Clara's jaw tightened. They weren't dogs either. Elias didn't respond. He left them there and returned to the house. That evening, he sat on the porch. The sun bled red across the hills. He thought he was alone. Then small footsteps crossed the dirt. The boy emerged from the barn, drawn by something Elias couldn't name. The child sat beside him without asking permission, just sat there, looking at the darkening sky. He pointed at the first star, then another. Elias found himself nodding at each one. No words passed between them. None were needed. The boy smiled. Elias almost did too. From the barn loft, Clara watched through the open door. She saw something in Elias that the town couldn't, something beneath the silence and the scars. Inside the house, Elias lay awake. Memory clawed at him. Another child, another night, running through darkness with his sister's hand in his. The moment he'd frozen, the moment she'd paid for his fear with her life. He'd sworn never to care again, never to fail again. But that boy outside, those eyes. Morning came too fast. Clara had cleaned his kitchen without asking, made breakfast from his stores. The smell of coffee filled the small space. She explained while they ate. Her husband had died 6 months back. Debts buried them. His family wanted the boy locked away, institutionalized. They said he was defective because he couldn't hear, couldn't speak. Clara had run. She'd answered marriage advertisements in 3 territories. Someone must have sold her information. Someone must have used it. Elias understood then. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Someone knew she was desperate. Someone knew he was vulnerable. Hoofbeats interrupted. Judge Caldwell rode up with 2 men as witnesses. He spoke of concern, of propriety, a white woman and child under a black man's roof. People were talking. He offered a solution. Marry her proper. Then sell the land and start fresh elsewhere. Elias refused both. The judge's mask slipped for just a moment. He mentioned the water rights meeting in 4 weeks. Said he hoped Elias's land claim would hold up under scrutiny. Said it would be a shame if those documents proved as questionable as the marriage letter. After he left, Clara packed their few belongings. They'd leave in the morning. She wouldn't bring him more trouble. But the boy was upset. He didn't understand why they had to go. His hands moved in frantic gestures Clara translated. Could he see the horses tomorrow? Please? Elias watched the child's distress. Something broke inside him. Or maybe something finally healed. The boy could see the horses. They could stay a few more days. Clara cooked better than him anyway. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was something. Clara unpacked slowly, hope and doubt warring on her face. That night, Elias stood at his sister's grave. He spoke aloud for the first time in years. Told Naomi he didn't know if he could save them, didn't know if he should try. But that boy looked at him like he mattered, like he was worth something. From the cabin window, Clara watched him grieve. She didn't know what ghosts haunted him, but she recognized a man who'd forgotten how to hope. In town, Judge Caldwell sat in his study. He sealed an envelope with satisfaction. The address read clearly in lamplight, Mrs. Margaret Whitlow, Kansas City, Missouri. The plan was working perfectly. A week passed. Clara established routines without asking permission. Breakfast at dawn, laundry on Mondays, garden work in the afternoons. She moved through the cabin like she'd always belonged there. Samuel helped with the animals. That's what Clara called the boy when she finally told Elias his name. Samuel had a gift with horses, especially the skittish mare no one could approach. Rebel. Elias had named her that for good reason. But Samuel walked right up to her, moved slow, kept his hands visible. Within 3 days, Rebel ate from his palm. Within 5, she let him brush her coat. Elias watched from the fence. The boy had the same instinct he'd developed in the cavalry, reading animals through movement and breath instead of sound, knowing when to advance and when to wait. He remembered nights during the war, calming spooked horses while artillery thundered overhead. The other scouts thought he had magic. He just paid attention. Samuel paid attention too. On the 8th morning, Elias woke to find his cattle fence cut, the herd scattered across 3 acres. Deliberate sabotage. He saddled his horse before the sun cleared the hills. A rider approached from the east, Miguel Torres, 50 years old with weathered hands and an honest face. He managed a small ranch 2 valleys over. He'd always treated Elias fair. Miguel offered to help track the cattle. Elias accepted. Samuel followed on Rebel without being told he could. The boy simply mounted and rode. Elias didn't send him back. They found the herd driven toward the judge's property line. The tracks told the story. 3 riders, deliberate herding, intent to create a boundary dispute. Elias redirected the cattle without confrontation, used old cavalry tactics, pressure from the sides, patient guidance. Samuel watched and learned, copied Elias's movements. The boy was sharp. Miguel spoke while they worked, asked if Elias had been a soldier. Elias confirmed it. 7th Regiment Cavalry Scout. He'd learned to read land before he learned to read books. Miguel said the judge didn't know who he was challenging. Elias said the judge knew exactly who he was challenging. That was the problem. Back at the ranch, Clara was in the cabin. She'd found things she shouldn't have. An old trunk beneath the bed. Inside were books, advanced texts on agriculture, philosophy, law, military commendations, letters written in careful script. She looked up when he entered, asked if he'd taught himself to read. Elias said he had. After the war, books didn't judge. Books didn't leave. Clara said people only left when they weren't given reasons to stay. She held one of the letters, not from the bundle tied with string, a single loose page, from Naomi, the last one, dated 1863. Elias took it from her hands, put it back without a word. But that evening they talked, really talked, about what they'd read, what they thought, ideas instead of just logistics. It was the first real conversation Elias had held in 15 years. Clara understood things, saw connections, challenged his thoughts without dismissing them. He found himself speaking more than he intended, told her books were safe, told her silence was safer. She said safety and living weren't always the same thing. The next day brought trouble to town. Samuel had gone with Clara for supplies. 3 boys threw rocks. One struck Samuel's shoulder. He didn't cry out. Couldn't. Just stood there taking it. Clara intervened, grabbed the nearest boy's arm. The parents came running, blamed her for touching their child. Said she was teaching that deaf mute to be uppity. Elias arrived before it escalated. Didn't speak. Didn't threaten. Just stood there, 6 feet tall and solid as the mountains behind him. The crowd dispersed. The boys scattered. The parents left muttering. But Clara saw what it cost him. The tension in his shoulders. The tightness in his jaw. The way he checked every shadow on the ride home. That night, Samuel signed to Clara. His hands moved in gestures only she understood. He asked why people hated them. Clara had no good answer. Some people feared what they didn't understand. Some people needed someone to be beneath them. Letters arrived for Clara throughout the following weeks, always postmarked Kansas City. She read them privately. Each one drained color from her face. She told Elias they were from a friend. A woman named Ruth checking on her welfare. Elias noticed her growing anxiety, the way she watched the road, the way her hands shook when the mail coach passed. But he didn't pry. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had a past they ran from. Miguel returned with company, a widow named Anna who owned the general store, a stable hand named Marcus who worked in town. All 3 had felt the judge's pressure. Miguel's water rights questioned. Anna's lease suddenly up for renegotiation. Marcus threatened with dismissal for serving Elias without hostility. They gathered at the ranch, shared information. The judge had a pattern: find leverage, apply pressure, force people out, buy property cheap. He'd done it 5 times in 3 years. Marcus revealed something else. The judge's son had died in the war, died under a commander named Boone. The judge had tried to bring charges. The army dismissed them, said the son died heroically. Elias went still. Memory crashed over him. A battle near Glorietta Pass, a young soldier diving in front of him. Taking the bullet meant for Elias's chest. The boy had died in his arms. Asked Elias to tell his father he'd died for something that mattered. Elias had written that letter, poured his heart into it, tried to honor the boy's sacrifice. The judge had returned it shredded, sent it back with a note. One word: murderer. Clara found him at the graves that evening, both hands pressed against the wooden markers. She didn't ask what was wrong, just stood beside him until he was ready to speak. He told her about his sister, about freezing when the bounty hunters came, about Naomi dying because he'd been too afraid to fight. He'd failed the person who mattered most, failed because fear paralyzed him. Clara said failing once didn't mean failing forever, said pushing people away wasn't protection. It was just another kind of prison. She'd been teaching sign language to Elias and the others, proper signs, not just gestures. She'd learned from a teacher back in Missouri. Samuel blossomed with real communication. His hands flew, his face lit up. He had so much to say. One evening, Samuel signed something while looking at Elias. Elias didn't understand, asked what it meant. Clara translated. The sign meant father. Elias stood abruptly, walked out. Clara found him on the porch an hour later. He said he couldn't be what Samuel needed, couldn't be trusted with that responsibility. Not after Naomi. Clara asked if he'd fail Samuel by pushing him away too. Asked if fear would take another person he cared about. Asked if that's what Naomi would have wanted. Elias had no answer. The water rights meeting came. The town hall packed. The judge presided. He questioned Elias's documentation, asked how an illiterate freedman produced such precise legal papers. Elias stood, spoke clearly, said he read and wrote just fine, better than some present. He held up 2 documents, his property deed, the forged marriage letter. Said he knew what forgery looked like, asked if the judge did too. Silence fell. The judge forced a smile, said they'd investigate both claims. Adjourned the meeting, whispered to Elias on the way out, said he should have left when he had the chance. That night, Elias made his decision. He asked Clara to marry him, not for love, for protection, legal standing. The judge couldn't touch her if she was his wife. Clara refused, said Samuel needed to see real partnership, not just arrangements, not just survival. He needed to see what it meant when 2 people chose each other freely. Elias asked her to teach him how to be a partner. She agreed to try. They called it a trial. Act as partners, see if it worked. Samuel was ecstatic, thought they were already family anyway. That evening they cooked together, all 3. First real laughter the house had ever held. Clara received another letter. This one made her go pale. She said Ruth might visit, said the timing was unexpected. Elias noticed her hands trembling as she folded it away. Miguel arrived after dark, brought news. The mail clerk who'd processed the forged letter was dead. Accident. Fell downstairs outside his boarding house. The only person who could testify against the judge. Elias understood. The judge was eliminating evidence, tying up loose ends, getting ready for something bigger. In town, a telegram was sent, addressed to Margaret Whitlow, Kansas City. The message was brief, located, arriving within 2 weeks. Prepare custody papers. The judge sealed it with a smile. 2 weeks of peace felt like a lifetime. Samuel trained Rebel every morning. The mare responded to him like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone who understood silence. Clara taught sign language in the evenings. A small group attended, mostly women. A few curious children. Even Marcus came twice a week. Elias smiled more, spoke more. One afternoon while mending fence, his hand brushed Clara's. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. The town shifted slightly. Some women waved to Clara now. Children watched Samuel with curiosity instead of fear. Not acceptance. Not yet. But the hostility had cracks in it. Samuel rode Rebel alone for the first time on a Tuesday morning. Cantered her in a wide circle around the corral. Perfect form. Perfect trust. When he dismounted, Elias was there waiting. Elias said the boy had the gift. Called him son without thinking. Samuel's hands flew in signs. Asked if Elias meant it. If he was really Samuel's father now. Elias looked at Clara. She nodded through tears. He turned back to Samuel. Said yes, if that's what Samuel wanted. The boy crashed into him. Arms wrapped tight. Elias held him like he'd never let go. The moment shattered with the sound of wheels on gravel. A fine carriage rolled up the drive. Not the regular stage, something expensive. Private. A woman stepped out, 40 years old with severe features and an expensive dress. Behind her came a man wearing a marshal's badge. Clara saw them and went rigid, pulled Samuel behind her back. The woman spoke one word, Clara's name, then told her to end this foolishness, ordered Samuel to come to her. Samuel hid behind Elias instead. The marshal showed papers, court orders from Missouri. Margaret Whitlow was Samuel's legal guardian. Clara was wanted for parental kidnapping. The boy had to be returned immediately. Clara's story came out in broken pieces. Her late husband hadn't been poor. He'd been Margaret's brother, a wealthy banker. Samuel was his sole heir, worth $50,000. Margaret and the family wanted Samuel institutionalized, wanted to control the inheritance. Clara had taken him and run. Elias felt the ground shift beneath him, asked if he'd just been a convenient hiding place. Clara said it started that way, but became real. He had to believe her. He walked away, couldn't process it, couldn't think. Hoofbeats announced another arrival. Judge Caldwell. Right on time. Too convenient. Obviously expected. Margaret thanked him. Said his telegram had been most helpful. The judge smiled. Explained his plan to the assembled group like he was proud of it. He'd contacted Margaret weeks ago, seen Clara's advertisement responses, forged the letter specifically to draw her to Elias, create scandal, force Elias off his land, collect a finder's fee from Margaret, 2 birds with 1 stone. Everyone went home happy, except the people whose lives he'd destroyed. Miguel stood at the edge of the property with Anna and Marcus. All 3 watched in horror. This was beyond land grabs. This was calculated cruelty. The marshal looked uncomfortable, said he was sorry, but law was law. The boy would leave at dawn. Clara would be taken into custody. He'd give them 1 night to say goodbye. Samuel barricaded himself in the barn with Rebel. Wouldn't come out. His signs were frantic, desperate movements. This was his home. Elias was his father. They'd promised. They'd said family. Elias tried to coax him out. Said sometimes promises weren't enough. Samuel stopped signing, went completely still, withdrew into himself. The light in his eyes died. That night Elias stood at Naomi's grave. Rage and grief poured out in whispered words. He'd finally let someone in, and this was what happened. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was cursed. Maybe he destroyed everything he touched. Clara approached, said she'd lied, used him, made everything worse, told him to tell the marshal he'd known nothing. He'd be clear of charges. Elias asked about Samuel. What happened to him? Clara said Margaret would institutionalize him. He'd spend his life in an asylum, locked away, forgotten. She'd tried to save him. She'd failed. Elias watched Samuel in the barn. The boy's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Memory crashed over him. Naomi dying in the dark, her voice asking why he hadn't fought. Young Elias saying he'd been scared. Naomi saying she died because of his fear. His face hardened. He walked to the barn, sat beside Samuel, signed with the words Clara had taught him, said he'd let fear take his sister, wouldn't let fear take his son, said he was going to fight. Samuel asked how. They had the law. Elias signed back. Then they'd change what the law saw. He called an emergency meeting. Miguel, Anna, Marcus, Clara, everyone gathered in the cabin. He said he wasn't asking for violence, asking for witnesses, asking for truth. Miguel had evidence. Letters from the judge to Eastern investors, promising land he didn't own. Documentation of fraud. Anna had testimony. The judge's late wife had confessed before she died. Said the judge's son had died saving Elias. Died heroically. The judge couldn't accept that his son had loved a black man like a brother. Marcus knew the judge's schedule. Could gather a crowd by noon tomorrow. Make this public. But the main problem remained. Margaret's legal claim was legitimate. Missouri courts had given her custody. The marshal had to enforce it. Elias said they'd convince her to drop it. Clara asked how. Margaret wanted the money, the inheritance. Elias said everyone wanted something. They just had to find out what Margaret really needed. That night he used his old cavalry skills. Tracked Margaret to the hotel, observed through the window. She sat alone, crying, looking at a photograph of her brother, talking to herself. Said he'd hate what she'd become, but the family business required it. The partners demanded it. Elias returned to the others. Said Margaret was trapped too, under pressure from family, not acting from pure greed. She was being used just like they were. New plan. Offer Margaret a way out that satisfied everyone. Show her another path. Dawn approached. Final hours before the marshal had to leave with Samuel. Elias, Clara, and Samuel sat together on the porch. Elias signed to Samuel, said whatever happened. Samuel was his son. Papers didn't change that. Hearts did. Samuel asked him to promise he'd fight. Elias promised. They walked toward town together. Word had spread. Miguel's doing. A crowd gathered in the square, curious, suspicious, eager for drama. The judge arrived, confused by the assembly. Margaret and the marshal came from the hotel. Both looked uncertain. This wasn't the quiet extraction they'd planned. Elias stepped into the center of the square. 15 years of silence ended in one moment. He said they'd have their hearing, but it would be public. Everyone would know the truth. The judge tried to shut it down, told the marshal to just take the boy. Elias raised his voice, said Judge Caldwell would answer for everything, every lie, every scheme, every life destroyed. The crowd pressed closer. This was better than Sunday service. Margaret stood apart, watching, wondering what she'd walked into. Elias began to speak, told them about the forged letter, about the judge's pattern of land theft, about the dead mail clerk who'd been silenced. Miguel stepped forward with documents. Proof of fraud. Letters to investors about property the judge didn't own. Anna testified. Said the judge's wife had confessed everything before dying. Said the judge blamed Elias for their son's death. But the boy had died saving Elias's life. Died a hero. The judge couldn't accept it. Elias turned to face the judge directly. Said his son had pushed him out of the way. Taken a bullet meant for Elias's chest. Died asking Elias to tell his father he'd died for something that mattered. Elias had tried, sent a letter. The judge sent it back shredded. The judge's face cracked. Started to say his son wouldn't die for someone like Elias. Caught himself. But the crowd heard it. Understood what he meant. What he'd always meant. Elias said the judge couldn't accept that his son loved a black man like family. So he'd spent 15 years making Elias pay. Making everyone pay who didn't fit his vision of how the world should be. Marcus presented witness statements. People the judge had threatened, pressured, destroyed. The evidence piled up. Undeniable. The marshal looked at the judge with new eyes. This wasn't about a custody dispute anymore. This was about fraud, conspiracy, possibly murder. Elias shifted focus. Asked Margaret why she was really here. She said for Samuel, for family. Elias said he'd tracked her last night, heard her crying, heard her say her brother would hate what she'd become. Margaret's composure broke, admitted the family business partners were pressuring her. They wanted Samuel's inheritance managed, wanted him institutionalized so they could control the money. If she refused, they'd destroy her own children's futures. They had leverage. She was trapped. Elias asked if she'd destroy Samuel's future to protect her own. Margaret wept, said her brother had become cruel, bitter. She didn't know why. Clara said quietly that he couldn't accept who Samuel was, saw his deaf son as defective, let it consume him until nothing good remained. Samuel walked forward, stood before Margaret, signed deliberately. Clara translated, asked if Margaret had ever loved him. Margaret broke down completely, said of course she had, of course she did. Samuel signed again, asked why she wanted to lock him away then. Margaret said the doctors claimed he'd be happier with others like him. Samuel signed that he was happy here, with them, with his father, pointed at Elias. The crowd watched in silence. Some wiped tears. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a child fighting for his life. Elias offered Margaret a third option. Tell the court Samuel died during travel, fever, accident, whatever she wanted. Estate would go to her as next of kin. Partners would lose their leverage. Samuel would stay here, safe, free. Everyone won except the people trying to control them. The marshal said that was fraud. Elias said forcing a child into an asylum he didn't need was worse. Said sometimes law and justice weren't the same thing. The marshal addressed Margaret, said he was no judge, but he'd seen enough. That boy knew where he belonged. If she pressed charges against Clara, he'd execute the warrant. But if she withdrew the complaint, he had no jurisdiction. Only she could decide what her brother would have truly wanted. Margaret looked at Samuel for a long time, really saw him for the first time. Not a defective heir, a thriving child. She thought of her brother before bitterness consumed him, before disappointment changed him into someone unrecognizable. She tore up the custody papers, said as far as Missouri was concerned, Samuel died of fever in transit. His inheritance became hers. The partners could go to hell. The marshal turned to the judge, said he was placing him under arrest. Conspiracy, fraud, accessory to murder regarding the mail clerk. The judge tried to leave. Marcus blocked his path. As they led him away, the judge said Elias had taken everything from him. Elias said no. He just stopped letting the judge take from him. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some congratulated Elias. Others avoided his eyes. Most didn't know what to think. Change came slowly, one choice at a time. Margaret prepared to leave, told Elias and Clara she'd send legal papers, make Clara Samuel's guardian, include a monthly stipend from the estate. What her brother should have done all along. Samuel hugged her, surprised everyone including Margaret, signed his thanks for letting him go. She touched his face gently, told Elias to take care of him. He'd already done more than they ever had. Clara asked what they did now. Elias said they went home, all three of them, together, finally free. The first week after the trial felt strange, too quiet. Like waiting for a storm that never came. Legal documents arrived from Margaret's attorney. Clara was Samuel's official guardian. The first monthly stipend came with it, enough to expand the ranch, hire help, build a real future. But money couldn't buy what they needed most. Acceptance came slow. Some townspeople crossed the street to avoid them. Others nodded in passing. The community split down invisible lines. Anna's store lost customers. Women who'd shopped there for years suddenly remembered other places to buy flour and thread. But new customers came too. People who respected what she'd done, who valued courage over comfort. Miguel took a job managing the judge's foreclosed properties. Government appointed him. Said they needed someone honest. He began returning land to families the judge had cheated. Correcting years of corruption, one deed at a time. Marcus lost his job at the stables. The owner sided with the judge, called the trial a disgrace, said decent people didn't air their troubles in public. Elias offered Marcus work the same day. The ranch needed another hand. Marcus accepted. Together they built something none of them could have built alone. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose. the kind of thing that couldn't be bought or inherited. Samuel struggled despite the victory. Nightmares came most nights. He'd wake up signing frantically, asking if they were leaving, if Margaret was coming back, if it was real. Clara held him through the worst of it, reminded him he was safe, that no one could take him away, that family was more than blood and papers. Elias taught him differently, showed him through action. Every morning they worked the ranch together. Every evening they sat on the porch watching stars, building routine, building trust, proving through consistency what words couldn't convey. One night Samuel asked via sign if people would always hate them. Elias was honest, said some would, but some wouldn't. They lived for the ones who didn't. They built their lives around the people who saw them as human. Samuel accepted that, started teaching sign language to other children. Kids were easier than adults, more curious, less burdened by their parents' fears. A small group formed, meeting twice a week in Anna's store back room. The children created a bridge their parents couldn't. Young minds saw Samuel as interesting, different but not wrong. They wanted to learn his language, wanted to communicate with him. Their parents watched. Some disapproved, others softened. Hard to maintain hatred when your child came home excited about their new friend. Clara wrestled with guilt. Her lies had nearly destroyed everything. She'd learned to hide truth as survival, under her first husband's cruelty. But hiding had become habit. She didn't know how to stop. Elias gave her a way forward, said she should tell him one true thing every day, no matter how hard. They'd build from there. Honesty in small pieces. Trust reconstructed one brick at a time. Her first truth came that night. Said she was terrified he'd realize she wasn't worth the fight, that he'd see her clearly and choose differently. Elias said it was too late. He'd already decided she was worth it, already committed. She was stuck with him now. Clara laughed through tears. It was the first time Elias had seen her laugh freely, unguarded. He wanted to see it again. Elias changed too, attended a town meeting voluntarily, spoke up about water rights and irrigation cooperation. Some men walked out when he started talking. Others stayed, actually listened to his proposals. Afterwards, the shopkeeper approached, said he hadn't known Elias was educated. Elias said no one had asked. Shopkeeper admitted that was fair, said his wife wanted to invite Elias to church on Sunday, if he was interested. Elias was surprised, asked if that was a real invitation. Shopkeeper said his wife was persuasive, very persuasive. He'd learned not to argue. It was a small victory. First social invitation in 15 years. Elias wasn't sure he'd go, but the fact he'd been asked mattered. Samuel's bond with Rebel deepened. The horse trusted him completely, followed him without a lead, responded to gestures other people couldn't see. They had their own language. Elias watched them together, told Samuel he'd done what Elias couldn't, made Rebel trust again. Samuel signed back that Elias had done the same for him, made him trust that adults could keep promises. They decided to start a training program, take difficult horses, ones other people had given up on. Samuel would gentle them, teach them trust was possible. It gave him purpose, a way to help others the way he'd been helped. The first clients were skeptical, didn't think a deaf boy could train horses, but Samuel proved them wrong. Within weeks, word spread. The Freedmen's Ranch took problem horses and turned them into partners. One evening, Elias asked Clara to walk with him, led her to the hill with Naomi's grave, said he needed to tell her something before they went further. He told her everything. How young they'd been during the escape. How Naomi had fought when bounty hunters found them. How Elias had frozen, paralyzed by fear while his sister died protecting him. Said he'd carried that failure every day since. Thought if he never cared again, he'd never fail again. Never have to watch someone die because he wasn't brave enough. Clara said that wasn't failure. That was being human. Fear didn't make him weak. It made him someone who understood what courage actually cost. Elias knelt in front of her, said he'd proposed before out of duty, was doing it again for a different reason, because she'd taught him he was worth fighting for, asked her to let him fight for her. said he couldn't promise perfect. But he could promise present. He'd show up every day, work beside her, build something real. Clara cried, said yes, but only if he promised to keep talking, keep letting her in, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Elias agreed. They sealed it with a kiss, gentle, tender, full of promise. They planned a small ceremony, just their small alliance. Miguel, Anna, Marcus, Samuel as ring-bearer, his request. He took the job seriously, practiced walking with the rings balanced on a small pillow Clara sewed. Preparation filled the following days. Clara altered the dress she'd brought originally, the one meant for a marriage that didn't exist. Now it would serve a marriage that did. Elias cleaned the cabin, added touches that made it a home instead of a shelter. Flowers in jars, books on shelves, photos on the wall. Evidence that people lived there, not just survived. Samuel picked wildflowers with deliberate care. He knew which ones lasted longest, which colors meant what. He wanted everything perfect. Miguel built new chairs for the porch, solid furniture meant for permanence. Marcus repaired the fence line, not because it needed it, because boundaries mattered, knowing where you belonged and defending it. Anna prepared food, too much food, enough to feed twice the number of expected guests. She said celebrations deserved abundance, deserved the acknowledgement that good things happened even in hard times. Word spread about the wedding. Town reactions varied. Some people sent gifts anonymously, left them on the porch before dawn. A quilt, preserves, a hand-carved frame. The shopkeeper's wife sent a note with hers. Said, "May your marriage be warmer than ours." Small words, huge meaning. Acknowledgement that love could exist across all the lines people drew. More gifts appeared, not from everyone, not even from most, but from enough, from people who saw courage and wanted to honor it. The night before the wedding, Samuel couldn't sleep. Came to find Elias on the porch, signed a question, asked if Elias would adopt him legally, make him a boon in every way. Elias hadn't considered it, hadn't thought beyond the moment. Clara joined them, said it was possible if Elias wanted it, if Samuel wanted it. Elias asked if Samuel was sure, asked if he understood what it meant. Taking a black man's name in a territory that still saw color before character. Samuel signed that he already knew what that meant. He lived it every day. Would rather live it as family than as something less. Elias's voice broke. Said they'd make it legal then. Samuel would be his son in every way that mattered, on paper and in heart. Samuel hugged him. Clara joined. All three standing together under stars that didn't care about courts or skin or the opinions of small minds. Morning came. Wedding day. Elias stood at Naomi's grave one final time as a single man, spoke to her like she could hear, told her about Clara, about Samuel, about the family he'd found when he stopped hiding, said he thought he'd finally forgiven himself, hoped she could forgive him too, placed 3 bunches of wildflowers, one his, one from Clara, one from Samuel, all 3 honoring the girl who died so Elias could live. He whispered that he wouldn't waste it anymore, wouldn't waste the life she'd given him, would live it fully, love fully, fight fully. Behind him, Clara watched from the cabin, saw him grieve and heal in the same moment, saw him let go of ghosts that had haunted him for decades. Samuel joined her at the window, signed that Elias was ready now, ready to be happy. Clara agreed. They all were. The ceremony would be simple. The commitment wouldn't be. They knew the road ahead held challenges. Prejudice didn't disappear because one judge went to prison. Fear didn't evaporate because one family chose love. But they'd face it together. 3 people who'd been broken finding strength in each other, building something new from the pieces of what they'd been. Elias walked back to the cabin. Clara met him at the door, took his hand. Together they prepared for the beginning of something neither had thought possible. A family, a home, a future worth fighting for. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon. Clear skies, warm sun, the kind of day that felt like a blessing. Miguel had built an arch from branches and wildflowers. Simple but beautiful. Exactly what they wanted. Anna arrived early with food, set up tables under the oak tree. Marcus helped arrange chairs. Not many needed, just enough for the people who mattered. Samuel wore his best shirt, held the ring pillow like it contained something precious, because it did. It contained the promise that family could be chosen, that love could be built instead of inherited. Clara's dress fit perfectly after the alterations. Simple white cotton. Nothing fancy. But the way Elias looked at her when she emerged from the cabin made her feel like royalty. Elias wore his one good suit. The same one he'd worn to testify at the trial. He'd brushed it clean, polished his boots, wanted to look worthy of the moment. Miguel officiated. He'd done it before for ranch hands who couldn't afford a preacher, knew the words by heart, but he added his own at the beginning, said he'd watched two broken people find each other, watched them build something stronger than either could have built alone. The vows were simple. Elias promised to show up, to speak even when silence felt safer, to fight for what they were building. Clara promised honesty, vulnerability, to choose him every day even when days got hard. Samuel presented the rings, his hands steady, his face solemn, understanding the weight of what was happening. When they slipped the bands on, he signed his approval, his joy visible in every gesture. Miguel pronounced them married. Elias kissed Clara, not their first kiss, but the first one that meant forever. The small crowd cheered. Even the trees seemed to celebrate, wind rustling leaves like applause. They ate together, laughed together, told stories about how they'd met, the absurdity of it. A forged letter bringing together three people who needed each other desperately. Anna said it was fate. Marcus said it was justice. Miguel said it was both. Sometimes the universe conspired to put people where they belonged. As evening came, guests departed. Hugs all around. Promises to visit soon. To continue building this small community of people who refused to accept the world's cruelty as inevitable. Elias and Clara stood on the porch, Samuel asleep inside, exhausted from excitement. They watched stars emerge one by one. Same stars Elias had shown Samuel that first night. Seemed like years ago. Was only months. Clara asked what he was thinking. Elias said he was thinking about beginnings. How rare they were after a certain age. How precious. She leaned against him, said she'd given up on beginnings, had accepted that survival was the best she could hope for. He'd given her more than survival. He'd given her life. Elias said she'd done the same for him, had walked into his isolation and refused to leave, had seen past the silence to the man underneath. No one had done that before. No one had tried. The next morning started their new routine. Married life looked a lot like unmarried life. Same work, same challenges, but different somehow. Lighter. The weight of uncertainty lifted. Samuel called them both by new signs. Parents, not guardians, not caretakers. Parents. The distinction mattered to him, mattered to all of them. Legal papers arrived making the adoption official. Samuel Boone, 10 years old, son of Elias and Clara Boone, protected by law now, part of a family the state recognized. Samuel traced his new name with his finger, smiled so wide it hurt to look at. This was belonging. This was permanence. This was everything he'd been denied his whole life. The horse training program grew faster than expected. Word spread about the deaf boy who could calm any animal. People brought horses from 3 territories over. Problem horses. Dangerous horses. Horses other trainers had given up on. Samuel worked with each one. Patient. Consistent. Never frustrated by setbacks. He understood what it meant to be labeled difficult. To be written off before being given a real chance. Elias watched him work, saw himself in the boy, the same quiet determination, the same refusal to accept others' limitations. Samuel had inherited nothing from Elias by blood, but he'd inherited everything that mattered by choice. Clara started teaching at the small schoolhouse 2 valleys over, 3 days a week. The teacher there had heard about her sign language classes, asked if she'd teach the children, expand their understanding of communication. Some parents objected, said their children didn't need to learn hand talk, said it was unnecessary, but enough parents supported it. Enough saw value in teaching children that different didn't mean less. Clara taught reading and arithmetic too, found she had a gift for it, for seeing where children struggled and finding new ways to explain, for making learning feel less like work and more like discovery. She came home energized on teaching days, told Elias and Samuel about the children's progress, about small victories. A shy girl who finally raised her hand, a struggling boy who suddenly understood fractions. Elias saw her come alive in ways she hadn't before, saw her find purpose beyond survival, beyond protecting Samuel. She was building something of her own, contributing to the community in ways that mattered. Miguel stopped by weekly, always with news. The judge's trial was set for spring. Federal charges. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd likely spend a decade in prison, maybe more. Some of the families he'd cheated were getting their land back. Others had moved on, started over elsewhere, but justice was happening, slowly, imperfectly, but happening. Anna expanded her store, used some of the customers she'd lost, gained others who valued integrity. She hired Marcus part-time to manage inventory, said she needed someone she could trust, someone who understood what it meant to stand up when standing up cost something. The small alliance became the foundation of a new community. Not the whole town, not even most of it, but enough. Enough to prove that change was possible, that people could choose differently. Church invitations continued. Elias attended twice, sat in the back, listened more than he participated, but he showed up. Let people see him in a context beyond his ranch, beyond his isolation. Some congregants welcomed him, shook his hand, asked about the horses, about Samuel, treated him like a neighbor instead of a problem. Others ignored him, sat far away, made their disapproval clear without words. Elias didn't expect universal acceptance, didn't need it. He had Clara, had Samuel, had friends who saw his humanity. That was enough. One evening Samuel asked about Naomi. He'd seen Elias at the grave every week, wanted to know who she was, why she mattered. Elias told him everything, didn't sugarcoat it, didn't make himself the hero, told the truth about his fear, his failure, his decades of guilt. Samuel listened carefully, then signed a question, asked if Naomi would have wanted Elias to be alone forever, to punish himself eternally. Elias had never thought about it that way, assumed guilt was what he deserved. But Samuel was right. Naomi had loved him, would have wanted him to live, to find joy, to forgive himself. Samuel signed that maybe the best way to honor her was to be happy. To prove her sacrifice meant something, that Elias used the life she'd given him fully. Clara watched this exchange with tears streaming, her son, teaching her husband how to heal, how to let go, how to accept grace. That night Elias added a fourth bunch of flowers to the graves, one from Samuel, a boy Naomi had never met but would have loved, a boy who understood loss and chose love anyway. Winter approached, the ranch prepared, stored hay, reinforced buildings, made ready for months of cold and isolation. But isolation felt different now. Not loneliness, just quieter togetherness. They spent long evenings by the fire, Clara reading aloud, Elias working leather, Samuel practicing signs for new words, the mundane intimacy of family life. Clara kept her promise, told Elias one hard truth every day, shared fears, doubts, moments she wanted to run. He listened without judgment, held space for her honesty, proved that vulnerability didn't lead to abandonment. Elias kept his promise too, spoke even when silence felt safer, shared his thoughts, his worries, his hopes, proved that opening up didn't mean losing control. Samuel watched them learn each other, model partnership. Show him what healthy love looked like. He'd never seen it before. His birth parents had been cold, distant. Margaret and her family had been controlling. This was different. This was choice sustained by daily commitment. Christmas came, their first as a legal family. They didn't have much, didn't need much. Samuel got new boots, Clara got books, Elias got a hat Clara had sewn secretly. But the real gift was the morning itself, waking up together, knowing they'd wake up together tomorrow. And the day after. No courts threatening, no judges scheming, just ordinary life, precious because it was theirs. On Christmas evening, they invited their small group for dinner. Miguel brought his guitar, played songs in Spanish and English. Anna brought pie. Marcus brought stories that made Samuel laugh silently. They stayed late, talking, planning, dreaming about what they could build together, not just for themselves, for others who needed proof that different was possible. As midnight approached, Elias stood on the porch watching his friends leave. Clara joined him, asked what he was thinking. He said he was thinking this was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures, not dramatic moments, just this. People choosing each other, day after day, building something good from the wreckage of what had been. Clara said he'd been redeemed long before he met her. He just hadn't known it yet, hadn't been ready to accept it. Elias pulled her close, said maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been waiting. For her, for Samuel, for the courage to believe he deserved another chance. Inside, Samuel slept peacefully. No nightmares tonight, just dreams of horses and family, and a future that finally felt secure. The ranch stood solid against the winter night. Warm light glowing from windows. Smoke rising from the chimney. A home where there had been only a house. A family where there had been only a man. Elias looked at the graves on the hill, made a silent promise. He'd keep living, keep choosing love, keep proving that Naomi's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight. The world wouldn't suddenly become fair, but they'd face it together. 3 people who'd been broken, now whole in ways that mattered most. Spring arrived with purpose. The land transformed from brown to green seemingly overnight. New growth everywhere, new possibilities. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Horses in training, cattle healthy, fields prepared for planting. Samuel turned 11 in March. They celebrated with cake Anna baked. Gifts from people who'd become family. Miguel carved him a wooden horse. Marcus gave him spurs he'd outgrown. Clara and Elias presented him with his own saddle, custom made. His initials burned into the leather. S.B. Samuel Boone. The boy ran his fingers over the letters, looked up with tears streaming, signed that it was the best gift anyone had ever given him, not the saddle itself. The proof that he belonged, that his name meant something. More children came for sign language lessons. Clara's classes grew from 5 students to 15, then 20. Parents who'd been skeptical saw their children connecting across differences, saw compassion replacing fear. The schoolhouse asked Clara to teach full-time, 5 days a week. She hesitated, looked to Elias for guidance. He said it was her choice. He and Samuel could manage the ranch. She should do what fulfilled her. She accepted, found herself becoming part of something larger. The children loved her, brought her wildflowers, shared secrets, looked to her as someone safe, someone who understood that everyone struggled with something. Elias expanded the horse operation, built additional corrals, a proper training ring. Samuel worked beside him. The boy had grown 3 inches over winter, getting taller, stronger, more confident. They developed a reputation, the ranch that took impossible cases, horses traumatized by abuse, born wild and never gentled, too aggressive for normal training. Samuel worked miracles with them all. Elias watched his son become someone remarkable, not despite his deafness, because of everything he was. The patience it had taught him, the observation skills, the empathy for creatures others had given up on. One afternoon, a wealthy rancher arrived from Colorado, brought a stallion everyone said should be destroyed, too dangerous. Had killed a handler 2 years prior, been locked in a stall ever since. The rancher had heard about Samuel, wanted to give the horse one last chance. If Samuel couldn't help, he'd put the animal down. Samuel studied the stallion for a full hour before approaching, watched how he moved, what triggered his fear responses, where he held tension, finally entered the corral alone. Elias wanted to stop him. Clara gripped his arm. They had to trust Samuel's judgment, trust what they'd taught him. Samuel moved like water, no sudden gestures, no direct approaches, just existing in the space, letting the horse get accustomed to his presence. Hours passed. The stallion slowly relaxed, approached, let Samuel touch his neck. By evening, Samuel had a lead rope on him. By week's end, the horse walked calmly. By month's end, he was riding him. The transformation was complete. The Colorado rancher paid double what they'd agreed, told everyone he knew about Samuel Boone, the deaf boy who spoke horse better than most men spoke English. Business increased. They hired 2 more hands, young men from town who needed work, who didn't care about Elias's skin or Samuel's deafness, who just wanted honest pay for honest labor. The ranch became a training ground for more than horses, became a place where people learned that prejudice was taught, that respect was earned through character, that family was built through choice. Judge Caldwell's trial concluded in April. Guilty on all charges, sentenced to 12 years federal prison. Some townspeople celebrated. Others grumbled that it was too harsh, that he'd just been protecting his interests. But most felt justice had been served. The judge's corruption had touched too many lives, destroyed too many families. 12 years wasn't enough for some. But it was something. Miguel took permanent position managing the redistributed properties. Became a voice for fairness in land disputes. People trusted him, knew he wouldn't favor friends or punish enemies, would just follow what was right. Anna married the widower who ran the feed store. Quiet ceremony, just friends. She'd been alone since her husband died in the war, had given up on companionship, but watching Elias and Clara reminded her that it was never too late. Marcus started courting a woman from the neighboring valley, a widow with 2 children. He brought her to meet Elias and Clara, wanted their blessing, wanted them to know she accepted his friendship with a black family. The woman was kind, her children were curious, asked Samuel to teach them signs, played with him like he was just another kid. Marcus married her in June. Elias stood up with him, first time he'd been asked to participate in someone's wedding. The community continued dividing and reforming. Some people left, moved to places where the old hierarchies still held firm, where change hadn't reached yet. Others stayed and adjusted, learned to see neighbors as people instead of categories. The shopkeeper who'd first invited Elias to church became an ally, started speaking up when others made cruel comments. His wife organized a women's group that included Clara. Small steps, but steps forward. Summer brought challenges. Drought threatened crops. A cattle disease swept through the valley. Hard times that tested everyone. But the small alliance helped each other, shared resources, worked together, proved that cooperation beat competition. Elias and Clara's marriage deepened. They'd learned each other's rhythms, when to speak and when to give space, when to push and when to accept. The daily negotiation of 2 people becoming partners. Clara's morning truths continued. Some days they were small. She'd burned the biscuits and hidden the evidence. Some days they were large. She still dreamed about her first husband, still flinched at loud voices. Elias received each truth with grace, shared his own. Days he wanted to retreat into silence. Moments he felt unworthy of what they'd built, fears that it could all disappear. They learned that honesty wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up imperfect and staying anyway. Samuel asked about his birth father one evening, what kind of man he'd been. Clara answered honestly, said he'd been smart and successful, but also cruel, unable to love what he couldn't control. Samuel asked if she thought his father had ever loved him. Clara said she thought he'd tried. But his own demons were too loud. He'd seen Samuel's deafness as failure, as reflection on himself. Couldn't see past it to the person underneath. Samuel signed that he was glad Elias was his father now. Elias had never seen him as broken, had seen him as capable from the start. Elias told him that was because Samuel wasn't broken, never had been. The world was broken for not making space for people like him. But Samuel would help fix that. Already was fixing it, one trained horse, one taught child, one changed mind at a time. Fall arrived with harvest. The community gathered for collective work, helping each other bring in crops. The ranch hosted a celebration after. Food and music and gratitude for surviving another year. People who'd never set foot on Elias's property came, some out of curiosity, some out of hunger. Some because their children had dragged them. They saw the ranch thriving, saw the family happy, saw proof that their prejudices had been wrong. Not everyone changed their minds. Some left early, uncomfortable with the mixing, with black and white and Mexican and deaf all sharing space as equals. But others stayed, laughed, ate, reconsidered what they'd been taught. Change happened in moments like these, not grand declarations, just ordinary people making small choices to see each other as human. Winter returned. Their second as a family felt different from the first, more settled, more certain. They knew how to be together now, had weathered enough storms to trust they could weather more. Elias stood at the graves one December evening, snow falling softly. He updated Naomi on everything, the ranch, the marriage, Samuel's accomplishments, told her she'd have loved Clara's fierce loyalty, Samuel's gentle strength, told her he'd finally forgiven himself, finally accepted that her death wasn't his fault, that fear was human, that he'd been a child too, that she wouldn't want him carrying guilt forever. Clara and Samuel joined him at the graves. They did this sometimes now, all three paying respects. Samuel left his flowers. Clara left hers, a family honoring the person who'd made their family possible. Walking back, Samuel asked Elias to tell the star story, the one Elias had invented for him, about a boy who couldn't hear the world, but could hear hearts. Elias told it while they walked, Clara's hand in his, Samuel between them, stars emerging overhead. The same stars that had witnessed their first night together. The night everything changed. At the house they made dinner together, their routine now. Each person contributing. Samuel set the table. Clara prepared food. Elias started the fire. Small tasks that added up to home. After eating, they sat around the fire. Clara reading. Elias working leather. Samuel practicing new signs he wanted to teach his students. The quiet intimacy of people who belonged to each other. No one spoke for a long time. Didn't need to. Sometimes silence was enough. Sometimes presence was the only language required. Outside the window, the ranch spread across the valley. Solid, permanent. A testament to three people who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd built belonging anyway. The graves on the hill held 4 bunches of flowers now, fresh even in winter. Proof that some people never leave you, that love transcends death. That sacrifice is honored through living fully. Elias looked at his family, his wife, his son, thought about the stagecoach that had arrived 18 months ago, the letter he never wrote, the plan meant to destroy him. Instead, it had saved him, given him everything he'd thought he'd lost forever. Purpose, connection, family, love. He'd spent 15 years believing he didn't deserve these things, believing isolation was safer than vulnerability, believing silence protected him from pain. But pain had found him anyway, and so had grace, in the form of a desperate woman and a deaf boy, in the form of unexpected allies, in the form of daily choices to stay, to fight, to build. Clara looked up from her book, caught him watching, smiled, asked what he was thinking. He said he was thinking about letters, about how one forged letter had led to this, to everything that mattered. She said sometimes the worst things led to the best things. Sometimes destruction was necessary for creation. Samuel signed agreement, said he wouldn't change anything, even the hard parts, because the hard parts led here. Elias pulled them both close, said they were right. He wouldn't change anything either. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, but inside they were warm, safe, together. A family that had been forged in deception and pain. That had chosen each other anyway. That would keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, for as long as they all lived.